Thank you, and thank you for being with us here in the lounge, and welcome to All Access Pass. I'm your cruise host, Jason, and like a broken record, here I am again with another absolute legend and star. Help me welcoming to our stage the one and only Mr. Peter Asher.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Now, Peter, I know that you and I have cruised together many times on our other charters, and you've been here once before.
Yes.
Tell us what it's like on the Malt Shop cruise in terms of being a different cruise from Rock and Romance and Flower Power, the other ones you do with us.
I don't know. I'm not sure I could really pin down the differences. I mean, you know which one you're on as soon as you hear the music.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep.
So whoever put together that playlist, it's great, you know. So if you wake up and it's Rocky Robin, you go, okay, it's that one.
I know where I am. Yeah.
But no, I mean, one of the joys of these cruises is meeting everybody and talking music with the people and stuff. And I'm not sure, honestly, just by looking or chatting to somebody, if I could pin down which cruise they went on, you know, because you'd think there'd be a big difference in age or something, but it doesn't seem like there really is. I mean, one music, and if you love music, you love music. And I'm also surprised by how many people I've met who are on this who are going on one of the other ones.
Yeah.
So multiple cruises seems to be the thing.
It's
now.
the way to go.
It's the way to go.
And I think that's kind of
what I do.
Yeah, that's how we book. That's how we book you. He wants to be on all the decades that we slowly built. He can't wait for the '80s cruise. He can't wait for it.
Exactly.
Before we jump into, as you know, I let the audience ask some questions, and we're going to get through. Actually, we've got a lot of questions from the audience, which is wonderful, and we'll probably be able to get to all of them. Do me a favor, and let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to where Peter Asher decides or starts to get an inkling that entertainment is what he wants to be in and do.
Well, it depends whether if you include acting.
I know you started as an actor. You're 8, right?
I was a child actor when I was 8. Did my first film. My first film was called The Planter's Wife, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. We shot it at Pinewood.
He was the wife. It was really interesting. It was really,
We shot it at Pinewood, you know, which was the famous studio where they do the Bond movies and everything. And my father was played by a very traditional English actor some of you might know, called Jack Hawkins. He's in Richard on the River Kwai. He's in all those kind of Lawrence of Arabia, you know, all those. And that was exciting for me. But infinitely more exciting on a very visceral level was the fact that my mother was played by a genuine American movie star. Because my mother was played in that film by Claudette Colbert. And see, that always gets one of the biggest. So I do have a picture of me kissing Claudette Colbert with great enthusiasm. I have to admit, I think I knew at the time she wasn't really my mother, and it was okay. You know? But yes, so that was when I realized that entertainment, the world of entertainment, was something, you know, and I enjoyed that a lot. I did a bunch of those Robin Hood TV series that was on for years back then. And then music, you know, my mother was a professional musician. She was a classical opera
professor as well, great.
Yes. She played in a number of the major classical orchestras, and she was an opera professor at the Royal Academy of Music in London. So I actually, apparently, spent the first year or two of my life on the road a lot, because at that point, all the orchestras were out entertaining troops and stuff, which included my mum. She remembers very clearly, by the way, that all the women were only allowed in the orchestra because all the men were at war. It was the same, you know, and they were told to walk on behind the men and be discreet. Did they
know your place?
They never learned their lesson.
Take a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
If we're going to be uptight.
You can't make jokes about anything.
Not anything anymore,
But I do anyway.
And so,
so my mum was an entertainer and would take me on the road, apparently. My father was obviously working at the hospital, you know, sewing up bombed people and all of that stuff they had to do. And but I apparently was left, you know, I'd be backstage under the watchful eye of some sergeant major or something, because there were a lot of women with babies out there on the road. And she was playing in the orchestra, and I was backstage. So that was my introduction to life on the road. But the first time I ever thought of entertaining musically, you know, other than I did have piano lessons and oboe lessons and stuff, but never took them seriously, unfortunately. Never got good enough to move into the classical world at all, or the jazz world, despite being a big jazz fan. But I fell in love with American folk music, and I could sing you every Woody Guthrie song by heart and things like that. That was one of my earliest musical loves. And then fell in love with American pop music, R&B, jazz, and all the stuff I talk about in my show. And then the first time we ever performed it was with Gordon, because we met at school and discovered we both played guitar and sang, but neither of us were doing it to an audience.
And you were quite young when you met, correct?
Yes, I suppose we were 14 or 12 or 13.
That's amazing.
14.
It's amazing that at that age you can meet and connect on a level where you kind of have a future, like create something.
Yeah, exactly. We eventually started singing together and thought it sounded okay. So, and then from that, the next step was just getting actual gigs. We would just walk into coffee bars and pubs and ask them if they ever had entertainment and would they like us to come do one night for nothing. And if people liked it, they can pay us the next night, things like that. And they did, luckily. So,
yeah.
Yeah, we did a gig at lunchtime where we got paid £1 each and a free pint of beer, which is a very good deal.
Not bad when you're 14.
Exactly. It's a hell of a deal. No, that was by that time we were about 17, I guess. That was later on. But yeah, we must have been 14 to 15 when we met, I guess.
And you guys, you obviously connected on multiple levels in terms of talent, and you know the fit was unique and special.
Yeah, I liked Gordon. We were lucky too because our voices were very different.
Yeah.
You know, in some duos, their voices are quite similar. I mean, even the Everly Brothers, who we were all trying to copy, of course. If Don or Phil take a solo line in a song, you can tell, but it's not immediately obvious. Whereas Gordon, has this huge, big, rich baritone voice, and I've got this sort of weedy, white choir boy sort of voice, and so we sound completely different. But together, we sounded okay. So we started learning as many songs as we could. I learned songs he knew, and vice versa. So we did some folk songs, we did bits of everything, and that was when we learned the fun of entertaining people. And we also learned that what we sincerely hoped was true, which is that playing the guitar and being able to sing does help you talk to girls. So
Yep.
that was the main thing.
And you just mentioned the Everly Brothers. Often when I have the honor of sitting with folks that have come up or that came up at a certain time, certainly across the pond, British entertainers and whatnot, I hear the Everly Brothers mentioned a lot in regards of being one of the earliest inspirations, and gosh, we wanted to be them, gosh, we love them. What was it about the Everly Brothers?
Well, it's the same thing it was about all American music. Once we heard American rock and roll, and we loved it. And obviously for us as a duo, who else are you going to pick as a role model? I mean, the Everlys were it. I mean, I actually thought at the time they'd invented that kind of music kind of out of whole cloth, from nowhere. But then much later on, I heard people like the Louvin brothers and stuff, and you suddenly realize, oh, they took that sort of bluegrassy Louvin brothers singing and added rock and roll on top of it and made some of the greatest records and the best duet records ever made. So yes, if you're Lennon and McCartney or Chad and Jeremy or Peter and Gordon or anybody, any two guys singing together, we all wanted to sound as much like the Everly Brothers as we could. None of us succeeded, but in the process of trying, that's how it usually happens. You try to copy somebody else and fail,
Sure, yeah.
But in failing, if you come up with something that's different and appealing, you're off and running.
I was just going to say, you can fail correctly to a certain extent.
Yes.
You can miss the mark,
Yeah.
but still land in a unique spot where you're creating something unique and special.
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, we lucked out. I mean, of course, we would have loved to sound exactly like the Everly Brothers, but in fact, when people would refer to us in reviews or something as, the Britain's answer to the Everly Brothers, that was the highest praise they could possibly give us. And I'll tell you one thing: it's, as I say, everybody starts off copying someone else without fail. And I had a conversation with David Crosby one time. This was years ago, and I remember it still to this minute because I was saying to him, I was talking about the Everlys and saying, well, I'm sure, when you and Chris Hillman started playing together, when the Byrds began, you were probably trying to sound like the Everly Brothers as well, right? And he went, no, he said, when Chris and I got together, we were trying to sound like you guys. And I went, oh my God. That's because of course at that time, the American bands were just starting to try and sound like English bands.
Yeah.
So when they started singing together, they were copying us. I went, that's the most amazing
It's cyclical,
thing I've ever
right?
heard.
Yeah.
That's so great. Thank you. And they did, of course, that's turned into the Byrds, and they did rather well.
Obviously. So let's advance slightly into your career. You then become a music man. You start working for Apple, correct?
Yes.
At some point there, and you're instrumental in figuring out and helping with the Beatles.
Yeah.
And you signed, as you mentioned in your book, or not in your book, in your show, James Taylor.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, please elaborate. His first album wasn't great, but you believed more than the others did.
Yes, I mean, the first album I think it's pretty good, but it's
Sorry,
but,
like
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big hit.
Yeah,
and
big hit.
And I agree. In retrospect, I could have made a better record, which is a separate discussion. But I will tell you how. But yeah. Well, the James story in brief. He was a musician I met quite coincidentally because there was a guitar player called Danny Korchmar who backed Peter and Gordon on some of our American tours. And he and I became very close friends. And we stayed in touch later on, even after Peter and Gordon stopped touring. Because we used to be given a band to accompany us, in America when we got there. We didn't have one. We didn't bring one with us. So, and Danny was subsequently in a band called The Flying Machine with his childhood friend, James Taylor. And when that band broke up, James decided to go to London. And at that point, Danny gave him my phone number and just said, listen, this guy, Peter Asher, I used to play with him. He's okay. Here's his phone number. So out of the blue, I got a call one day in my flat in London. This guy who introduced himself as James Taylor and said he was a friend of Danny's. And I said, oh, great, come on over, come have dinner. He came over to dinner the next night, and he didn't know I'd got this new job, which I'd just got. So he came over and played me some songs that he'd recorded on a little tape, and then he picked up my guitar and played me a couple more, and I went crazy. Said, this is the greatest music I've heard for years, and I've just got this new job. I'm head of Apple Records. Would you like a record deal? And he said, yes, please, I'd love one. And it was that.
That was dessert.
But seriously, that was it. I'm not exaggerating. So the next day, I took him into Apple to introduce him to whoever was there. I said, were there any Beatles in the building? And there were. We had George was there and Paul was there. So I sat James down and had him play a couple of tunes for them. They loved him too. And we were off and running. So that's how he ended up being signed to Apple. And then, yes, the first album was it was a different kind of production. It was very overproduced in some respect. I put a lot of strings on it, some horns on it, all that stuff. And they had some good songs on it, like Caroline in My Mind was on that first album. But then, when it came to America, we left Apple, which is a whole other complicated story, and signed him to Warner Brothers and made a much simpler record.
Yeah.
And that was the one that became Sweet Baby James and did well.
And sometimes it's that simple, which is what's always baffling to me about people's origin stories in terms of when they become a star or how they become a star. He knows a guy who happens to know you, plays a couple of songs over dinner, and then the world gets James Taylor.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, as you know, I do like to open it up to the audience as we move along. So we'll ask some more history questions, but I also love to get the audience involved. Greg from Kansas City wants to know, when you shared your... Sorry, I thought it said shaved. I thought you said when you shaved Paul McCartney. When you shared Paul McCartney at your family home, when you shared your family home with Paul McCartney, did you ever think, or did he ever think, the band would end up as big as it became?
Well, they were getting big at the time, so yes, it was sort of evident already. Because let's not forget, because people often ask me questions about Liverpool or about Germany, and I didn't know anything about the Beatles then. There's the Beatles I met with the first time they came down to London.
Oh yeah.
So, which was when they had their first big hit, and Beatlemania was beginning. So the clues were kind of obvious, because even just having him move into our house caused there to be girls waiting on the doorstep and stuff like that. So Beatlemania was underway. So you didn't have to be a genius to go. Plus the fact that that first record came out and almost everybody who heard it went, these boys are rather good. So, yes, I thought they'd be huge, and yes, they were. And I think we all know their ambitions were infinite.
Sure.
They wanted to be bigger than Elvis. I mean, their manager, Brian Epstein, said that. But deep down, they felt it as well. And they were right, of course. They did get to be bigger than Elvis.
Not bad when you aim for that. Debbie comes to us from New York, Westbury to be specific. What is your fondest memory, if you have one, politely said, of Ringo? And if you would be able to share, did he have any feelings about replacing Pete Best?
I never talked to him about that.
Okay.
Which probably wouldn't have been a very tactful subject.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I like Ringo a lot, and I see him now, of course, because he lives a lot of time in L.A. So my memories of Ringo, there are recent ones as well as old ones. But I remember Paul telling me stories. I know that Ringo was actually, and I think this has been written about, but when the Beatles were breaking up and stuff, when everyone was arguing, the first Beatle to actually quit, in fact, was Ringo. And I remember Paul coming home that day, he was still at our house, and saying, in a state of shock, you know, because he said, you know, Ringo sort of walked out today, and it was like, they clearly didn't expect that at all. So, but Ringo just got fed up with them arguing all the time. So it was the fact that clearly things were not going very smoothly, that John and Paul were arguing all the time. But the one who said, I'm fed up with this, and walked out was Ringo. And that tells you a lot about him, because he doesn't say much, but what he says is extremely important.
Impactful, yeah.
And also, my other memories of Ringo are just loving his drumming from the moment I first heard him, because, you know, drumming, rock and roll drumming could get a bit complicated then. People were doing fancy solos and playing tons of beats and stuff. And Ringo played this simple stuff, and Ringo's fills were works of genius on their own, you know, because they were like arranged fills. They weren't just round the kit a couple of times and then back, you know. They were no, I'm going to play boom, 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 some very specific lick that he heard in his head that fitted the song perfectly.
Yeah.
So my earliest memories of Ringo were probably having the fun of visiting a Beatles session and hearing him play and seeing what an extraordinary drummer he actually was. I still think he's underrated as a drummer. He's quite brilliant.
Well said, sir. I believe it's Lynette. Forgive me if I mispronounce that. Lynette Edwards from Houston. When Gordon passed away, we are so sorry. Were you still singing together at the time?
No. Well, yes. No, sorry. Yes, the answer to that would be actually yes. We'd stopped singing together for a long time. We just sort of drifted apart. And we got back together after a gap that I think was 37 years.
That's a lifetime, not a gap. That's
I know.
a healthy gap.
Exactly. But I think that's the right number. Because we know, well, let me go a little further back. Gordon and I never actually broke up as such. We never had a big row. The Everlys, as you know, broke up very vividly. They tried to kill each other on stage. And, I mean, virtually.
That's how you go down.
Smashed guitars and got into fights. And, you know, Gordon and I, you may have heard this story, but Gordon and I were such Everly's fans. We tried to copy everything they did, but fortunately we didn't copy
Not that part, yeah.
But because they would do this thing where they came off from opposite sides of the stage, and met in the middle, and sang on one microphone brilliantly. Then at the end of the show, they'd leave to opposite sides as well. We thought that was so cool. When Gordon and I were playing places big enough to have a real stage, we would copy that exactly. Little did we know that the reason they did that, the reason they went off in opposite directions, was that they absolutely couldn't stand each other. And they'd found that the only way they could tour together without getting into physical fights was to come on from opposite sides, leave from opposite sides, stay in separate hotels. Honest to God. And then their tour managers would work out the set list for them. So anyway, so Gordon and I broke up much more quietly. He decided he wanted to make some solo records. I already knew I wanted to be a record producer. So we stopped singing together, and we never said how long for. We never said that's it or anything like that. But in fact, this sort of temporary hiatus did drift on for 37 years. And I was very glad that we did get back together. We got back together because of Paul Schaefer.
Yeah.
Paul Schaefer from the Letterman Show was doing a benefit, organizing a benefit for his friend Mike Smith from the Dave Clark Five, who was a fellow keyboard player of Paul's. And it was actually Paul Schaefer's wife, Kathy, who suggested to him that if you can get Peter and Gordon back together, that would be something for his 60s benefit, because it's been a while, and indeed it had. So she did. Paul called me and said, can you do this? And I had a feeling that if ever we were going to do it, this was the time, because Mike Smith was a friend. It was a good cause. We knew Paul Schaefer would put a killer band together, which he did. So we said yes. And as I say, I'm very glad we did, because it was only a couple of years after we got back together that Gordon did die. So So we were very lucky that we did get back together. So to just see if we still could sing together, which we could, and we still enjoyed it.
Did it feel like old home week when you first got back together?
It did. I mean, it took some work. It took some practice.
Sure.
And a bit of rehearsing, and we were lucky to have a great band under Paul Schaefer, and then subsequently, of course, under my own brilliant band leader, Jeff Allen Ross, who's many of you have probably met in the course of your week here. And so, yes, we were very glad we got back together, and we still sounded like us. That's what I was worried about.
That's the key. Yeah,
exactly. But it worked.
Ed from Brooklyn has a fantastic question. Nicely done, Ed. Well written too, sir. The writers write the songs. The singers sing the songs. Could you please explain to us, what do the producers actually do in the songs?
I thought that must be where we were headed. Right? It varies very much in case by case, because it's more. Think of the producer as directing the movie. So, if somebody else wrote the movie, the director usually gets involved in the casting, what actors are playing which parts. He may even make changes in the script in detail, but it's still somebody else's story, and so on. So the record producer essentially decides what kind of record it's going to be, works with the artist to figure out what kind of musicians do we want to get. Are we going to, is this going to have a big orchestra on it? Is this going to be just a couple of musicians? And where will we do it? And very often what songs we're going to do as well. Now, sometimes if it's a singer-songwriter, maybe you know what the songs are because it's whatever they wrote is what you do. Other times with people I've worked with, like Linda Ronstadt, who didn't write songs, or Cher, who doesn't write songs, the director is also, the record producer is also partly responsible for choosing what songs you do, and so on. So kind of either from everything or nothing. Now, some producers, like Phil Spector, take a complete sort of auteur approach, as it were, that they are in charge of everything and they just tell the artist what to do. I've never been that kind of producer. But in case of my records, it does begin sitting down with the artist and saying, what kind of record do you want to make? What are we doing? What's our aim here? What songs have you got? Can I hear them? What sort of musicians are your favorite and who should we hire to play on the record? All those things. But it's a collaborative effort, obviously, between the record producer and the artist. And who does what when does vary very much from case to case. I could talk about specific records, but there's no overall formula. Unless you're the kind of producer that goes, here's the record I'm making. Yeah. Shut up and sing when I tell you, which is kind of what Phil Spector did, and did it brilliantly. Came up with some great records, but sometimes the artist didn't get a whole lot of input on those records.
And they have some bitter feelings eventually about it at some point, yeah.
They do.
Tom from Connecticut and Steve from, is that Warsaw Woods, forgive me. Steve, have actually kind of the same question. Will Peter and Jeremy be touring together again?
Yes. Yeah, we've done a few of those. It's fun because obviously once.
Could you explain Peter and Jeremy for people who don't know? Of
course,
first?
Sorry. Yes, of course. There were two duos who were part of the British invasion: Peter and Gordon, and Chad and Jeremy, and we would get mistaken for each other all the time because we were the only two duos. So when we did the Ed Sullivan show, people would come up to them the next day and say, "You sounded so great on Sullivan last night," or they would do things. Like because they were both actors as well, so they would do things like the Dick Van Dyke Show or the Patty Duke Show. And to this day, no one's done it yet on this cruise, but there's always somebody who goes, "Loved you guys on the Dick Van Dyke Show. You were hilarious." But we now know the solution is just to go, "Thank you very much, yes," and
move on.
And literally, that's what Jeremy and I do now. And then, of course, Chad. And the weird thing is, when you think about it, how many similarities there were, because in
First
both
names.
Cases, Jeremy was whose name was second. Interestingly, Jeremy was the tall, handsome one, who sang the lead part, as was Gordon, and Chad, of course, was the smaller guy, wears glasses, sings the high part, and is incredibly brilliant. So the similarities are. The similarities are unavoidable. But anyway, so the question was, when Chad retired and then, of course, sadly died, and Gordon had died before that. Jeremy and I looked at each other and kind of went, well, Peter and Jeremy sounds okay to me. And of course, we get to sing both sets of hits. So I get to sing Summer Song and Yesterday's Gone and Willow Weep for Me and stuff. And Jeremy has to sing with me on all the Peter and Gordon hits. So we have fun doing it. Plus, we both like to think of the, we're both actors as well, and both like to think that we were capable of a little sort of witty repartee, on stage. So we have a bit of dialogue going back and forth, and we have a great time actually doing these shows together. I know we've got some coming up, but I don't remember where they are in my head.
Excellent.
But there are people who do know.
That's all that matters, as long as somebody somewhere knows.
Yeah, somebody will tell me where to go when.
Over there, Peter. Linda comes to us from Nashville. She has a multi-part question. First and foremost, I'm a huge fan, and I'm thrilled you are here. Is there something you did not put in the book that you wish you had?
Well, the book, see, you have to understand the book I wrote, is a book based on the radio show I did. It's a book about the Beatles from A to Z.
A to Z, Beatles
but
A to Z. Yeah.
It's based on a series of radio shows I did, just using letters of the alphabet as a jumping off point, not just for song titles, but for everything. It's kind of, stole the idea from Sesame Street, kind of, This week is brought to you by the letter M or whatever. So,
sometimes it's that
the answer
simple.
to his question, it's a good question. There are, but I can't think what they are right now. I mean, I know I've thought of things, and said, "Oh, I should have put that in." But can I bring one of those back now? No. And then the other book, there is a book about me. There's a biography that this man wrote about me, which is infinitely more detailed. And he put stuff in I'd completely forgotten about. So that's a separate book. But as far as the Beatles from A to Z book, I think it's pretty complete as to the extent, to the great extent I could make it. So, I did try to remember, and of course I did have the radio show to listen to remind me what I talked about on the radio.
Her second question was, we're getting cheeky, are we, Linda? Was there anything off the record about sharing the house with Paul that you would care to share with all of us close friends here in the room?
No.
That one time you walked in on him in the restroom. That in the loo. There you go. Debbie asked a great question. Debbie says, your book about the Beatles, this plays off what you just said a moment ago. Your book about the Beatles is fantastic. Have you ever thought of writing your own autobiography? You've done so much. I'm sure it would be amazing.
Well, there is one now, but I didn't write it. Somebody else did, which I prefer, because there is something deliberately self-aggrandizing about writing your own biography. And he probably put in things I might not have, and he certainly did more research. And it's as if now he's the one who has a better memory of all my past deeds and misdeeds than I do. But no, so I'm not thinking about writing an autobiography, no.
Well, you should. Jeff?
Well, but honestly, this biography is, I'm not just trying to sell books.
No,
I
it
don't
is.
get. The guy makes the money, not me, as he should. But he did a good job, and if you are curious, it's worth getting. David Jacks is the guy's name who wrote it, and it's quite good.
Jeff from New York City, did you ever play at the Cavern or the Casbah in Liverpool with the Beatles?
It was a yes up until
with the with or without the Beatles.
No,
either way.
Let's go with or without. No, you see, I played the Cavern much more recently. In the last few years, they do a week at the Cavern or something, which I've done a couple of times, I think, a few years back. But back in the day, no. No, back when the Beatles were playing the Cavern, we never played the Cavern with or without them, because we'd never been there or anything. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier, that people forget that my association with the Beatles only began when they came down to London.
Frame. And
to us, also, this whole fuss about Liverpool was a bit hard to figure out because, nobody was very fond of Liverpool, It was a pretty ugly town, and everyone we knew in Liverpool, as soon as they made any money, whether it was a band or anything else, the first thing they bought was a train ticket to London. So they, everyone, I think, and certainly in music, you weren't making it until you got down to London. And then the Beatles, of course, they're brilliant. All those Beatles and other bands added in this whole German thing, which was amazing. We never played there either, but that was extraordinary that they developed a whole other market for their music in another country.
Another Debbie, we got a few Debbies from Pulaski. Is that Tennessee, Debbie? Pulaski, Tennessee. Thank you. Are you going to? Oh, here we go. I can tell you the answer. It's more of a comment than a question.
Okay.
Your acoustic show on the other cruises that we've seen you do is absolutely fantastic. We'd love to see you do one here at some point. Explain what that is for folks that haven't seen you on the other cruises.
Well, what I usually do is just once we know who's going to be around, I just ask everybody if they'd like to come and play, a song or two and contribute. So we did one that was like a tribute to the songs of Carole King. We've done one just where I asked people, for example, what's the song that got you a record deal? Mm-hmm. What did you play for your audition? And basically I get all the great musicians who are out on the road, and everyone brings an acoustic guitar, and we make it up as we go along.
Yeah.
And we've had fun doing that. We didn't, unfortunately, get to do it on this trip, but we do whenever we can.
It is, when we do the other cruises, our 60s cruise and our 70s cruise, it's on a different cruise line, and that line has a different lounge configuration. And the secondary theater on the ship that we have our 60s, 70s cruises on is actually quite large. It's not the big theater, it's not the Geeter theater size, but it's quite large. So it enables us to do a different, I'm going to use horrible terms. It allows us to do a different level of secondary theater type shows where we can do one-offs. And I don't mean to disrespect anyone who's in this room, but if you're in this room, you have to do at least 2, if not 3, to make sure everybody sees you. Where on the other cruise ship, we can do a one-off, and most people that want to go can go type of deal. So we can do an event like that, because you can't. Yeah, we agree. You can't bottle what Peter's talking about. He literally gets on board, and we don't know what he's going to do. We just put a Peter Asher acoustic show in the program. We have no idea what stars are going to show up. We don't know how many plugins they need, what instruments. Our tech team is running wild, and inevitably it turns out to be one of the most talked about shows of the cruise, because it really is in the moment.
Yes, and thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thank you. We will be doing more, yes, certainly.
George comes to us from Longboat Key in Florida, and George wants to know, in your personal opinion, what is the biggest difference, either then or now, USA, England, culturally, professionally, etc.?
Oh, my goodness. God, you'd have to separate it by fields, because America and Britain are so different in so many ways. I mean, and of course, I'm a citizen of both, and I love both countries. I love America. I mean, and all the cliches about America, being the land of opportunity and all that stuff are true. There's a much greater sense in this country that you can achieve whatever you want to if you put your mind to it, than there is in England. England's just a more structured kind of society, I guess, and I love all of that. I'm a big fan of America and what it stands for, and musically, of course, America is the mother country. In the same way that Britain may be the mother country, sort of politically, in the sense that your basic laws and stuff came from Britain. They also, of course, your basic laws were helped when you were trying to escape from Britain, quite correctly. But yes, I think, and musically, as I say, America rules the world, as far as I'm concerned. Because in the world of popular music, nobody has contributed as much as America has, even close. There's no comparison. Other than that, God, we'd have to sort of go with right. I think theater is better in Britain. Movies are better in America. I don't know.
Yeah, you start to go down
there. A list, and pick the things that America and Britain are particularly good at or bad at.
Connie prefaced this question. Connie comes from Selbyville, and Connie says, "We told you in the elevator we were going to ask you a tough question."
Okay.
So,
here we go.
I am a nurse, and I noticed recently you had some health situations. How has this affected your outlook on life? Thank God you're still here. We love you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a couple of things. I had a bit of brain surgery and a bit of heart surgery.
Just a bit. A bit of brain surgery and heart surgery. Just a bit.
Yeah, it was all rather exciting for a while. But I'm fine. Everything is good. Thank you.
Amen.
Me too. Yeah.
I know.
I had a brain operation and I have a new heart valve. But all these things are so. I mean, these are things that used to be such a big deal, and now it's just amazing what they do. You get out of hospital the next day,
I'm sure you heard from a billion people, but I text Peter right after, well, not right after, but recently after he had his brain surgery. I texted and just said, Peter, I love you, man. I hope you're doing okay. You know, give me a thumbs up if you're all right. He said, fine. Enough said, sir. I got you.
No, it's great because you
All
know,
good.
yeah, I got back to work very quickly, and it hasn't changed my attitude to life. I don't think at all. I mean, I've never entertained thoughts of retirement, so I work as hard, if not harder, than I ever have. My schedule is crazy, and I like it that way.
Yes.
So yes, I'm very fortunate.
We are very fortunate, sir. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Two questions left, then we'll get you out of here, my friend. Jeff from Boynton Beach says, we love this topic apparently. What caused the breakup between your sister and Paul?
I don't address that question.
Fair enough.
That's a whole area there that I don't answer.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And the last question is my question, because you and I have had this discussion for years, because there's rumors and you've addressed them with me, but I'd like to put them out here in public. Is the character of Austin Powers based on you?
The look of Austin Powers is based on me.
Isn't that a cool little tidbit?
If there are pictures you can clearly see. There's one particular photo of me that Mike has told me he did use as a model. Because if you were trying to decide what your international man of mystery should look like, I don't think glasses and bad teeth are necessarily the first thing you'd think of, you know. But in fact, that's the look he chose. Now the character was based on some other people, as you know. There's a DJ called Simon D, who was rather pleased with himself, and I think apparently he was the role model for the sort of character of Austin Powers, which I may not have been. Not that I wasn't shagadelic, but
well, Marianne Faithfull, yeah.
But I don't think I can take credit for all of him. But yes, the look, the glasses, which of course were Buddy Holly glasses when I got them. That's who I wanted to look like.
Yeah.
And the crooked teeth, which became a British trademark.
We all have to be known for something.
Yeah.
Something I get asked a lot, and I don't know if people just don't want to ask you personally or don't see you enough to ask you, so I'll ask you. Obviously, we are here celebrating music from the generations past, and some of the greatest generations in music. But are there current artists, with your ear and your mind for music, are there any current artists that you see or hear that you say, that person has it?
Oh yes, I mean there's some brand new ones. There's so many good singer-songwriters out there now. It's amazing. I mean, there's this woman Holly Humberstone I'm a big fan of. There's a Nigerian, British Nigerian woman. What's her name? So sorry, I've forgotten her name.
All right.
But there's a bunch of great people. I mean, and occasionally I do go crazy, like as I did in the day. I mean, I very fortunately got to hear Ed Sheeran at a very early stage, and became friends with him. But in the minute I heard him, this is the James Taylor for the next generation. Of course, now he's been around for a while, but Ed became a close friend, and I've worked with him in the studio. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen him live, but I mean, you see this one guy with a tiny guitar playing to 100,000 people. It's a revelation, and his records are amazing. So yes, I'm as keen on new music now as I ever was.
That is something I appreciate about you is, and I mean this with all due respect to artists, sometimes artists that made their way up at an earlier time and had to fight for things a little differently than being able to go on social media and get millions of followers and views. I don't want to use the word jaded, but there is a little bit of these kids don't work for it as hard, and maybe there's a little bit of disrespect to current artists, and not that a lot of them don't deserve disrespect, but there is a little bit of that, current artists don't have it. But you've always maintained, and you and I have done these interviews for years, and you've always maintained there's lots of talent in every era, including the current era, and sometimes it's unfair to just dismiss them because of how easy it may have been, or easier.
And if you think it was easy, it never was.
Yeah.
I mean, you actually analyze it. It's like with Ed, he was considered an overnight sensation, and he'd done 2,000 gigs before he got a record deal. He was playing cinema queues, he was playing outside shops and stuff.
Busking all around.
Busking everywhere. So yeah, it's almost never easy. Almost every time you hear about someone, and I'm always so impressed when these people have a big hit out of nowhere, and then you actually get to see them, and they're really good. I mean, they've got
Yeah.
other great Olivia Rodrigo. I don't know if you ever watched that Tiny Desk thing,
Yeah.
you know, that NPR thing,
Just a young,
which is great because
very
you
young
get to
girl.
see brand new people playing without their band. And she's up there singing a couple of amazing songs. So, because I loved Driving License when I heard it,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
but
catchy.
I thought, then you think, well, that's probably just it, you know.
Yeah.
But it turns out she's terrific. You know, there's so much exciting music out there. It's great. Same with bands too.
I just love how open-minded you always are about music and.
Yeah, but you're right. Some generations, it tends to be that, oh, they don't write songs like
Yeah.
that anymore. You know,
Yeah.
back in my day,
Yeah.
we really wrote proper songs and all that. That's all bullshit.
Now there are some that write very poorly. Don't get it wrong, but
Yes,
yeah.
of course so.
Yeah.
But they usually don't make it.
Yeah, they typically are short for the
Yes,
world, so to speak.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. As
No, it's a pleasure.
always, I
It's a
always
pleasure,
appreciate having
Jason.
you with us.
You're very good at this.
Thank you, sir. My friends, put your hands together for the one and only Mr. Peter Asher.